to restrictions on religious gatherings, the Catholic Church has asked the faithful to pray and observe Holy Week in their homes. The government, meanwhile, has entered into a vaccine cooperation agreement with India. But will this fast-track the vaccination program? We discuss in this episode of the Chiefs. Welcome to this special edition of the Chiefs. With me via Zoom are Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5 and Ed Lingao of One News. And later on, we'll be joined by Ami Pamintuan, who will be joining us from Manila, also via Zoom. Bok, LCV, welcome.
Good evening, Rob.
Good evening. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. But mamaya we'll be talking to the Catholic Church. But kanina, the big story was mukhang may banggaan ang church at saka the Diocese of Manila threatening to defy the Iatf ban on religious gatherings.
Nagtatampo sila because they have not been consulted. They're wondering why everybody gets consulted except the church. I mean, you know, and in a way they have a point because as far as I remember, from the very start, the IATF just unilaterally rules on, you know, how many people, if at all, will be admitted into a church. No? So, and they have an argument in the point now that really worship is essential, especially if you're a religious person.
And Ami's here na rin. I mean, let me just add to that, Lucy, di ba? But another point that they were making, bakit nga naman daw yung mga spa, bakit daw yung mga malls, pinapayagan, mga gym, but
the restaurants are at 30%,
but
they're at 10.
But
right?
an update there, we did have a story coming in later in the big story kanina that the IATF apparently has reversed itself on the matter, certainly at least of spas and gyms. That at least takes away 1 point.
Yeah.
Ami,
and there's also an added context to that. Kasi in church during worship, you do sing and you do make vocal responses. So may added the danger din dyan on transmissions. That's not something that you normally do in spas or gyms.
But it's close contact in a spa. That's really close contact, and that's for way more than 15 minutes, if I say. And you're probably going to be in a small air-conditioned place, right? So there you go.
Ami, you were saying.
I've been to church, but I've not been to a spa, so I don't know.
Hindi, yung Metro Manila Council daw ang nag-vote dyan na ayaw na nga nilang buksan yung spa and gym.
Yes.
Manila Council, the mayors.
Actually, pabago-bago sila dyan di ba? Nung Saturday, pinayagan. Nung Monday, binawi. Today, binalik na naman, di ba, yung ban. So,
anyway, we'll get into all of that later, all of the confusion as well as some bad news. But let's start with some good news. We want to bring in our guest tonight. After all, India's ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador Shambhu Kumaran. Ambassador, welcome to the Chiefs.
welcome, Ambassador.
Ambassador, namaste.
Yeah. And Ambassador, we're bringing you in because we hear you have some wonderful news to share with us, and a cooperation between the Philippines and India when it comes to vaccine. Maybe give us the broad strokes of this news.
Well, the news that is most recent is that Secretary Galvez visited India. And he had discussions with the Serum Institute, which, as you may be aware, is the world's largest manufacturer of vaccines. And they would be licensed manufacturing the American vaccine Novavax, which the Philippines has signed a supply contract for. I would await full details from the Philippines government, but I'm told that it involves about 30 million doses for the government and a certain quantity for the private sector. And these would come in the second half, from the third quarter of this year.
Ambassador, this is Novavax, but the head of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Benedicto Yuwico, told us that they were in touch with you for the procurement as well from Bharat Biotech of their vaccine. Could you tell us more about it?
Yes, the Bharat Biotech vaccine, as some of you may be aware, is a vaccine that's been developed by one of India's leading biotech companies, Bharat Biotech. It is a vaccine that is now currently being used in India's extensive vaccination program. As you know, we've already crossed over 40 million vaccinations with a target of about 300 million by August. Bharat has applied for an emergency use authorization in the Philippines, and we are expecting that this authorization would happen very quickly. And in parallel, we are also hoping that discussions can take place on potential supply agreements. Mr. Joey Concepcion and his Go Negocio have coordinated possible procurement by the private sector on a tripartite basis as per the Philippine rules. We support that engagement. We'd like to see a lot of these small and medium enterprises benefit from this wonderful Indian vaccine. It had an efficacy of about 81% in its phase 3 trials in interim results. It's also showing a great promise in terms of some of the variants. So we believe that this vaccine would be a big contribution to the Philippines' fight against COVID-19.
Ambassador, once you get the EUA, up to how many doses might Bharat be able to provide to the Philippines, and how soon might that be? Because we had the impression that Mr. Yuhuico was in talks with you as far back as January.
Yes, we've been actually in contact with the Philippines government since January. Bharat actually filed. It was the first foreign regulatory filing for Bharat Biotech in the Philippines worldwide. That was on 21st of January. And we've been in touch with the Philippines government. Of course, the number of doses really depends on when the supply contracts are concluded. I believe that we may be slightly delayed on that score already. And that's why I'm hoping that these discussions can take place quickly, because just about 10 days ago, Bharat just closed a 20 million doses deal with Brazil. And there are various other countries with whom it has signed term sheets with over 20 countries. So at this stage, I'm not too sure about the volumes, but we are optimistic that over a period of time, up to 8 million doses of Bharat can be supplied. Of course, if we work towards an early agreement, we can have some doses coming in the second quarter itself.
Mr.
Do they
Ambassador,
require, like Pfizer and AstraZeneca, who required the indemnity law before they could actually assure us of supplies? No, I wonder if Bharat and SII require the same thing.
Well, the indemnity law is something I think that has come up in the context of some other suppliers. But now that that is part of the law, I believe that all companies would want to avail of that provision. But it was not something that our companies had initially put forward as a requirement.
Well,
Mr.
would
Ambassador,
it have helped? Okay, just a follow up. Would it have helped? Would it have helped if we had applied for that earlier, much earlier? Do you think?
You mean if we had asked for the vaccines earlier, would it have?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, possibly yes, because we are very confident about Indian pharma. We are the largest supplier of medicines to the Philippines already. We believe that our vaccine, this Bharat Biotech vaccine, has shown excellent safety outcomes, and there have been no adverse events following immunization in India. Of course, as a corporation, if the provision exists under the law, they would like to avail of it.
Yes. Right. Of course. Yeah.
Well,
We're
Mr.
just
Ambassador,
wondering because, as you know, the schedules of the arrivals of vaccines have been much delayed. And as it stands now, we can hardly wait for the third quarter to come so that the majority of these vaccines would be made available here. Go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
Well, sir, during our discussion with the ambassador or former ambassador Yuiko last week, we got the impression from him that the discussions with the Bharat Biotech by the PCCI, it was a missed opportunity because he was saying that we could have gotten the vaccines by now. I'm wondering from your point of view, was there a point of delay, or is it really? Or was it an imagined thing by the PCCI? Could we have gotten the vaccines earlier from Bharat as claimed by the PCCI? And is there any point of conflict or point of delay along the process?
Well, I'd be very reluctant to wade into a domestic discussion about, potential delays in vaccine procurement. Of course, there was a window where we could have secured a larger number of doses earlier, but there were also scientific factors in that Bharat did not complete its phase 3 trials, and they've
Yes.
not been available. Our own preference would have been to have, rather than sequential discussions, parallel discussions on commercial arrangements, even as the scientific process of regulatory approval is being carried out. To that extent, perhaps we could have saved some time.
How is the COVID situation in India now? And how do we compare? I mean, it, it's a good thing that at least India manufactures its own vaccines. So I'm just wondering if the situation is better controlled there.
Well, India, the situation is very much looking like it is coming under control. We have fully reopened our economy. It is to be said that over the past few days, we've seen a certain increase in the number of cases, especially in one or two provinces. But we do believe that we have the healthcare capacity in place to be able to handle that requirement. And throughout this COVID period, we've noticed that the mortality rates in India have been low, and we hope that it continues to be so. In the Philippines, there has been, because of possibly the presence of new variants, there has been an increase in the cases. But we are already rolling out our vaccines, and our healthcare system is very able to cope, because we have now developed, under Prime Minister Modi's personal leadership, a capacity to provide protective equipment, to provide the sort of social campaign that encourages people to be cautious in their behavior. However, there are occasions where you do need to enforce the provisions in a more rigorous manner. Like in the Philippines, sometimes you have faith-based congregations or festivals or something of the sort where people are slightly disregarding it. But the Prime Minister has led from the front, from putting in a very strong lockdown to opening it up gradually, to focusing on self-reliance, and in now to sort of bring the economy to a process of growth. I think we are cited by some of the international organizations to become the fastest growing economy in the world, with over 11% growth this year in 2021. So we're really looking at a revival of the India growth story. And we do hope that this vaccine initiative that we've done is called Vaccine Maitri, where India is the only country in the world which has actually shipped more vaccines abroad than it has provided to its own people. We have shipped over 60 million doses of vaccines to over 70 countries. And as I was our own vaccine effort is, of course, now going to ramp up considerably. Just today, the government has announced that from the 1st of April, all people above 45 would be eligible to be vaccinated. So we're looking at an expansion of the vaccination program in the near future.
Hey, Ambassador, everybody,
You-
you mentioned the public health infrastructure that you have in place. Everybody is looking the same way, notwithstanding the uncertainties right now. There are people already saying that when all of this is well and over, that we now have to start at investing in new things. Everybody's saying maybe we need our own CDC, we have to beef up our research and development, and we need our own technologies and our own capacity to be manufacturing our own medicines and vaccines. I'm sure a lot of people are just curious, how did India get to its place right now in terms of having components of all of these things in place?
Well, we are truly, in a sense, fortunate that we made the right investments several decades ago in creating the capacities that are beginning to, pay results now in terms of our pharmaceutical capacity in biotechnology industry. There was a good and enabling policy framework. As you know, we have in India not accepted some of the prescriptions that come in from the developed countries relating to patents, etc., because they tend to stifle domestic industry. Try to create an enabling policy framework, while at the same time being fully compliant with our obligations under WTO and other rules. So we really do feel that domestic industry to survive does require from time to time creative and innovative policy space to be created, and support from the government in terms of research and development and investment in that. We are constantly trying to increase our R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP, invest in education, skills, and creating institutions. So it's been a long process of several decades, and we are also have the advantage of having a large domestic market, which helps us to be able to offer our industry some avenues to market their products and grow in size. Having said that, India's pharma industry is only about $35 billion in value, which I noted recently in other interviews, just about the revenue of one large multinational corporation in the developed country. So we still have a long way to go, but this crisis has shown us that we have the primary conditions in place. And what really helps us is the network of connections that we build in other developing countries in terms of providing affordable medicines and building trust in the India brand. I think that's going to count a lot in the future.
Well, in connection with that, does the deal with the Philippines involve something that goes beyond just the vaccines to possibly a treatment or a cure for COVID? Is that in the works? And if so, does the deal cover sharing that with the Philippines?
Well, there are, of course, there's a lot of experience that people have gained clinical observation and sort of combining various treatment methodologies. But unfortunately, I don't think there is one tried and tested set of medications that can address this disease. It is still a work in progress. Various combinations have been tried. I notice in the Philippines, there's a discussion now about ivermectin as a potential treatment. There was, possibility of, remdesivir and antivirals were discussed. Hydroxychloroquine was initially seen to be quite promising. So various drugs have been tried, and doctors are beginning to understand that with some patients, some combination of drugs works best. It's really a task of combining clinical, watching clinical outcomes and combining clinical experience to provide the right treatment to various patients show different kinds of reactions to COVID. So trying to ameliorate the symptoms is essentially what it's about. I don't think a curative therapeutic regime is available.
Sir, I understand that a big part of Secretary Galvez's discussions with India, it also involves the possibility of India helping the Philippines put up its own vaccine production in the Philippines. Can you give us more details on that?
Well, at the moment, I think the discussions are essentially around procurement of vaccines, because this is such a major global health emergency that longer term plans are discussed. They are discussed. We do have, of course, the intention to try and promote and support whatever is possible in terms of manufacturing cooperation. But that is a more to medium to long-term engagement. Currently, the focus really is on trying to get the supplies in and commence the vaccine process in a early time frame.
Well, considering the resources of India, it's really impressive the way you have developed your local pharmaceutical industry. Would you say that this is more government-driven or private sector-driven? We ask because we're wondering how much people are saying that the government needs to pour in more investment in the Philippines to create this kind of ecosystem that will develop a local pharmaceutical industry.
Well, Amy, that's a very, very perceptive question. And I was actually just thinking that it is difficult to answer one editor, but you have four editors. And this is a very question. I believe that the private sector has a very important role to play in terms of taking the manufacturing processes forward. But in terms of basic research, we still find that a degree of government support is essential because the ability to carry forward research to the market is something that is quite expensive. And many companies in India do not have the resources to be able to invest in research on a molecule and then take that right through to the market. But the important thing is that at some point of time, the public research investment should be turned into a marketable product. And that linkage between the government and the private sector, I think that's a critical ingredient that makes the thing, makes the whole process work. And so you do need a degree of public investment, continued public investment, and private sector willing to work with the government. Like Bharat Biotech's vaccine was jointly developed by the Indian Council of Medical Research and the National Institute of Virology, along with Bharat Biotech. But now that it's gone to a commercial stage, Bharat is moving ahead with that. I think this is similar to many cases, in, let's say, with the Oxford vaccine or with Pfizer and other vaccines. State support was provided, but then the companies also played their part.
Mr. Ambassador, if you don't mind, we'd like to widen the discussion a bit. I mean, beyond COVID and beyond vaccines, what do you see as pillars or areas for strengthening relations between the Philippines and India? And let me prompt you, probably if you could discuss the areas of trade on the one hand, and for that matter, security.
I believe that we are going through a fundamental transformation in the India-Philippines relationship. And it's driven by objective factors. Philippines is one of the world's largest countries. It is, growing. It at least until COVID. There has been some slowdown due to COVID, but earlier you were showing very consistent and strong growth trends. And we believe that the Philippines' economic future is very robust, and the economic driver is one of the key factors that brings our relationship to a new level. We also see that in the emerging geography of the Indo-Pacific, the Philippines is very centrally located. And the fact that the Philippines is a strong democracy, a vibrant democracy, sometimes, people tend to disregard democracies as not being able to, deliver on the ground. But effectively, what we find as a democracy ourselves is that democratic progress may appear slow, but it is more deep-rooted, and it provides a lot of succor to a larger number of our population. So because of the importance that we place on democracy as part of the mix for political progress in the Indo-Pacific, we see the Philippines as a very important partner in Prime Minister Modi's Act East policy. And therefore, threats that impinge on the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Philippines, we do believe that as a friend and partner, we'd like to support the Philippines in developing its own capabilities to address some of those challenges. So therefore, defense and security cooperation becomes important in terms of maritime security or counterterrorism, etc. So you'd find this broad-based engagement on side, but also on the defense and security side in terms of the political and the larger institutional engagement that both are part of. We see a lot of good similarities.
Ambassador, yeah. Ambassador, let me throw some details, some details just from recent news pertaining to security. 220 Chinese ships within our EEZ in disputed waters, and for that matter, reports of the Philippines purchasing missiles from India. I do also want to ask it in the context of Indo-Pacific. We've been hearing this term, Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific. Seems like a new framing of the geopolitical order in this part of the world. There are surveys that show that Filipinos have the lowest awareness of what ASEAN is. Most Filipinos are still wrapping their heads on what the APEC is or what the Asia-Pacific is. And now the framing is Indo-Pacific, India being one of the pillars there. What exactly does the new framing of Indo-Pacific mean for Philippine security, particularly in the South China Sea?
Well, the Indo-Pacific is, to our mind, the fulcrum of the new, geostrategic and geoeconomic development of the world, because we do sense that economic activity is shifting, the center of gravity is shifting from the Euro-Atlantic area to what we now call the Indo-Pacific, which we in India define as a connected body of water that ranges from the west coast of the United States to the east coast of Africa. And of course, India is very centrally located. We'd like to see a peaceful, stable, prosperous, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, where rules are respected. And you did mention some recent incidents that are of concern to the Philippines. We do believe that international law should be respected and that disputes should be settled through peaceful means, and that countries, especially powerful ones, have to respect, and we seem to be respecting the international law and a rules-based order. And in that context, there is a renewed focus on this entire geopolitical construct of the Indo-Pacific, something that brings together all the major actors in this space. And I believe that ASEAN is very centrally involved in this. ASEAN's centrality and ASEAN's unity will be important elements for us in the Indo-Pacific context.
Is India prepared to take a greater security role in the region, particularly Southeast Asia?
Most definitely, we would like to have stronger security partnerships. In fact, when Prime Minister Modi announced that our Look East policy would be transformed into an Act East policy, he had specifically identified security as a twin pillar, because earlier when our Look East policy had a very strong economic focus, and Prime Minister was of the view, and he coined a phrase called Saga, which means ocean in Hindi, which is security and growth for all in the region. So under the Saga framework, we see security and economic growth as moving together, because without security, there cannot be any growth in the region.
Yeah. Mr. Ambassador, if you don't mind, when you say security and growth, and when you say the fulcrum is shifting from North America and Europe into this part of the world, both in the context of security and growth, is the Indo-Pacific framing therefore basically an attempt to balance China?
Well, as I said, our effort is to try and be as inclusive as possible. And we would really encourage all players, especially the important players, to recognize the need to adhere to international law and to respect a rules-based order. There should be no bullying of the small by the mighty. And I think these are important elements that countries need to incorporate in their policies. It's not enough to be, flourishing in rhetoric, but people do watch what you do, and it is there, I believe, that all the attention is focused currently.
Okay. India's ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador Shambhu Kumaran, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Salamat po. Namaste.
And we need to take a break. The Chiefs will be right back.
As Holy Week draws near, the Catholic Church says it will not push through with Holy Week processions this year as coronavirus cases surge.
We are going to do away with the procession because processions actually call for so many people's participation. That's why we are not going to do that. because we wanted also the people to be protected from this virus.
The Archdiocese of Manila says it will hold religious gatherings at very limited capacity this Holy Week. That is, despite the recent IATF directive prohibiting all church gatherings.
Traditionally, when I was young, Holy Week was a time when people stayed at home, prayed, and didn't go out. There were no activities for the whole duration of the Holy Week. If we can implement something like that, so that's culturally more acceptable than just a forced lockdown where people will be forced to just stay home and not go out.
Welcome back, the Chiefs are here on One News. We continue our conversation. Now joining us is Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines spokesperson, Father Jerome Secillano. Father Secillano, welcome again to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Father.
Evening, Father.
Hi, good evening to everyone. Good evening po sa inyo lahat.
Father, we were reporting kanina, let's start with this para lang malinaw. The Archdiocese of Manila saying they will defy the IATF ban on religious gatherings. Is that the position of the CBCP?
No, first of all, let me clarify about the position of the Archdiocese of Manila. We just finished our meeting with Bishop Abilio, and these are the things that came out from that meeting. Number one, there is no defying of government policy. The bishop is very much compliant with government policy. So it was just an expression of a religious right. Pangalawa, na lumabas dito sa meeting namin, na principle of subsidiarity should apply. Meaning to say, we are not opening our churches and imposing on the people to come to us during Holy Week celebrations, but under the principle of subsidiarity, it's the people, who will decide whether they need spiritual sustenance during these days of the Holy Week. And then, pangatlo, na napag-usapan namin dito, even the bishop canceled yung pagtitipon sana ng mga pare ngayong Holy Wednesday for the Chrism Mass. So, ang daming pare na pupunta sana dyan. But because of the prevailing pronouncement of the IATF, sabi ng obispo na hindi natin gagawin yan, kasi nga, merong pagbabawal nitong mass gathering. So, just to set the record straight, yun po. And tomorrow, the bishop will go on media also in order to clarify that news that seemingly he was defying the government. No, there was no defiance.
Okay, Father, linawin ko lang po yung isang detalye lang po, linawin ko. Because if I understood you correctly, you're saying, hindi kami mananawagan na magpunta kayo dito, but on the other hand, kung gustong magpunta ng mga tao, hindi naman namin sila mapipigilan. Tama po ba yung pagkakarinig ko? Because ang tanong ko po doon is, may misa po ba o wala?
Well, hindi mo po pwedeng tanggalin po yung mga misa. The only thing that is prohibited ay yung participation ng public for the masses.
Okay.
So I think there's a great deal of difference between the two. Kaya nga po meron tayong social media platform kasi doon po namin ini-air yung mga misa namin.
Tapa.
Kaya wala naman tayong i-air na masses kung hindi namin gagawin.
Pero kung meron pong magkusa,
kung
meron pong magkusa, gaya po ng sinasabi nyo, kung merong magkusa na magpunta doon habang nagmimisa, papapasukin po ba o hindi?
Well, unang-una po malinaw sa amin na merong pagbabawal, pero kapag ando doon na po yan, basta ho ay di naman ho namin talaga, kumbaga ipagtatabu yan. Pero sasabihan lang namin na meron po talagang pagbabawal ngayon, pero hindi mo kasi alam kung bakit ba nagpunta yan, in spite of the announcement that really we should not attend these masses itong public, we should not hold public gatherings. So kami sa simbahan malinaw na di talaga kami, kumbaga ay magkakaroon ng public gathering. But if the person himself insists that kailangan ko lang po kasing magkumpisal, kailangan ko lang po makarinig ng salita ng Diyos, you should also try to understand yung situation. Bakit namin ipagtatabuyan yung tao? So yun po yung context nito.
Pero
Pero Father, if it's a mass, sige po, go ahead.
Nawin lang natin, nakasara yung simbahan. Kasi sabi naman ng PNP, papayagan daw kung nasa labas. Kasi maraming simbahan na may mga santo rin na pwede ka mag-way of the cross, o kaya habang nagla-livestream kayo ng misa, naririnig din yun sa labas, di ba? Pwede rin daw mag-intay doon basta may distancing, saka sinusunod yung mga age restrictions. Are you talking about that? Nakasara ba yung simbahan mismo?
Opo.
So walang
Opo.
makakapasok sa simbahan.
Sasara po yung simbahan.
Sa labas, halimbawa sa Quiapo, yun ang madalas mangyari, di ba? Nakasara yung simbahan pero hanggang alas 12 ng gabi. May mga nagdadasal sa labas wala na kayong magagawa doon, di ba? Is that what you're saying? Na kung
Tama po.
na doon, wala na kayong magagawa doon.
Tama po. Paulit-ulit po natin yung sabihin. Tama po yung sinasabi po ninyo na gusto din magdasal ng tao for as long as hindi naman yan talaga yung major congregation of people that calls for more than siguro 50, 100. Hindi naman po ganun. Ibig sabihin, yung tao kasi gusto nilang magdasal. So, ando doon sila siguro pa isa-isa, siguro dalawa. So, but we're not going to tell them na do not enter our church. Kasi gusto lang naman sa labas din po, meron naman po tayo ang sound system. So, pwede din sila makapakinig sa labas. And the pinakamaganda nga po dahil may social media platform, may Facebook, kahit sa loob ng bahay po nila, mas comfortable at talagang mas magiging malinaw, nakikita nila lahat ng proceedings. So, mas maganda po yung gano'n na mangyayari, social media.
Father,
So,
klaro
talagang-
lang po, are you saying po na sa labas lamang, ibig sabihin the churches will be closed? Or are you saying sa labas is an option, but sa loob is also an option that will depend on the churchgoer if he wants to go in?
Okay, ganito po ang simbahan po ay tumutupad dun sa protocol. Ngayon kapag halimbawa po may magsisimba, naririnig po nila doon sa labas. Okay, nandun po sila sa labas. Ngayon po kung halimbawa may isang nilalang na gusto pong magbukas, pwede po bang pumasok ako? Isang nilalang lang naman po ito na siguro di natin alam ang kanyang situation, bakit ba gusto niyang pumasok sa simbahan, maybe to find solace inside the church, maybe to really to talk to the priest later on. Yung pong ganung mga senaryo, siguro naman hindi pwedeng sabihin ng IATF na lumabag kami doon sa mass gathering kasi we're only talking about one person. So sana po klarado din po yung pagsasabi namin patungkol dyan.
So sa madaling sabi, sarado ang pinto. At kung gustong pumasok, paano yun kakatok? Maririnig nyo ba yun? Lalo na kung malaki yung simbahan. At I'm just wondering about the practicality of it. No? So talagang sarado yung pinto.
Alam po ninyo practical kasi po meron kaming mga tao, merong security guard dyan, meron kami tinatawag na greeters and collectors, meron namang mga volunteers. And besides, yung scenario po na binabanggit ninyo, kapag nakapag-announce na ho kasi kami that public celebration of masses ay hindi naman talaga gagawin, I don't think the people will still go there kung talagang hindi naman nila kinakailangan pumunta. And we're also looking at this possibility that because of the spike in coronavirus cases, I wouldn't even think that people will be brave enough to go out and then really mingle with some other people. So yun po ang nakikita naman namin dito sa scenario.
Okay. Now,
Well,
Father,
Father,
linawin
of course,
lang po yung isa pong punto kanina ng sinabi ng Archdiocese. In a way, ramdam mo naman yung may sama ng loob, no? Not just confusion, but also sama ng loob. And one of the things that they basically said was, we were never even consulted. Could you speak to that? Was the church consulted on the new protocols for the stricter lockdown?
Well, I think yung ganung protocol, andyan dyan na kasi yan Kumbaga, nire-implement lang. So, last year pa ho, meron ng ganyang protocol. Yun nga lang, ngayong taon na to, wala naman din talagang pag-uusap man lang, kumbaga, naipaabiso ba. Yun po ang sinasabi naman ni Bishop Abilio. Kaya nga po sana, dahil medyo nag-evolve na naman kahit papano yung time, sana man lang, sabi niya, ay natanong man lang sana kami kung ano yung situation, kung ano yung pwede namin gawin. Kasi we maintain that inside the church, we are implementing all these health protocols. Sabi nga kanina sa meeting namin, mas stricto pa nga tayo sa pag-i-implementa nito. Talagang yung physical distancing, ginagawa yan sa loob ng simbahan compared to some other establishments. So yun din ang parang lament ng aming obispo. But then, sabi nga niya, but hindi naman natin yan kung dinidefy. There's no defiance. So he will have to clarify that tomorrow para hindi mapag-usapan. Kasi iba yung naging dating sa secular media nung naging pronouncement. Kaya lumabas na dinidefy ng Archdiocese. Kaya tuloy yung Malacanang nag-react agad. So I hope magkaroon ng understanding patungkol dito.
Yes.
Pero
Well,
Father, what did you
do
mean by
understand.
that? Did you mean that if you had been consulted, you would have been able to prove your case that you're actually so much more careful than most public places are in observing the protocols, and that you would be confident that you would be able to control the churchgoers.
Most
Meron bang
definitely.
ganong chance? Yeah.
Most definitely, that's going to be
So-
our stand. As you report
So-
on these things, wala naman tayo napapabalita na sa loob ng simbahan ay meron talagang spike ng coronavirus. Lumampas po yung piyesa ng Quiapo noong January. Ang dami hong mga nagsasabi, naku, grabe yung coronavirus yan kasi dinagsa din ng libo-libong tao yun. Sabi nga po ninyo, parang wala ng disiplina yung mga tao. Nung lumabas yung report ng mga independent survey firms or whatever, wala naman ho silang nakita na yung piyesa ng Quiapo ay nagdagdag sa kaso ng coronavirus. Kaya, yung sinasabi ko po ngayon, yes, we are confident that we are doing our best to control the spread of the virus. But then, at the end of it all, we also don't want to be blamed. Malay natin, kasi because of the unpredictability of this coronavirus, malay natin, nagkaroon nga ng ganung spike at binunto ng sisi sa simbahan. We don't want that to happen also.
Well, Father, we do understand the concerns of the church, and we do appreciate the desire of the church to hew very closely to the protocols being put up by government. Pero po, in your example kanina doon sa yung pag may kumatok naman sa simbahan isang tao, let me push it a little bit further lang. Kasi you talked about the principle of subsidiarity. Where would you draw the line? Pag isa kumatok po, of course, isang tao lang yun. That's the one thing. Pero as you go along with the 1-hour mass, you may have more people knocking, and word will get around. So I'm wondering po how you intend to operationalize this principle of subsidiarity.
Well, for one, sabi ko nga sa inyo na we are not encouraging people to attend. So doon pa lang sa announcement namin na meron tayong celebration ng masses, but you can stay at home, sumusunod naman po yung mga tao sa amin. Kaya yung scenario na binabanggit ninyo, we are looking at it na parang isolated case yun na magdadagsaan yung 50, 100 persons para magsimba. I don't think so. So yung pong sinasabi niyong drawing the line, unang-una pa lang sa statement namin, celebration of masses will be beamed live over FB. Okay, you can stay at the confines of your homes. You can attend the masses through our social media, the social media platforms. So, and then the blessings that we give in using the social media platforms, makakarating din yan sa inyo. Binabasbasan din yung palaspas. Hindi nyo na kinakailangan magdala ng palaspas sa simbahan. So, things like that, which we did last year.
So, Father, yung palaspas, pwedeng live stream yun, virtual. Tapos, yung Station of the Cross, kung yung compound ng church, merong mga pwedeng outdoors, okay din yun, basta may distancing. Ngayon, yung sa Easter Sunday, meron ba kayong itutuloy nyo ba? Kasi this is a church ritual mainly Hindi naman talaga may malaking participation ng tao. Itutuloy nyo ba yung salubong?
Hindi po. Wala na pong salubong po na gagawin kasi procession po yun Ang procession, alam po natin na talagang dinadagsa ng tao yan. Kaya po walang procession. Wala din po ng bisita iglesia tuwing Holy Thursday. Wala din po ng kumpisa lang bayan. So yun po, para maklaro lang din sa utak ng mga tao na yan ba yung nagdi-defy? Tinanggal nga po yung mga ganong activities.
Okay. So now, Father, go ahead, Ami.
Akala namin ilang cities lang sa Metro Manila, lahat na pala siya. Within the bubble na pala, ganyan na.
Apo, yung pong dito pong mga provinces na nabanggit sa bubble, talagang lumalabas dito na wala talagang public celebration ng mga liturgies. Pero outside of the bubble, wala naman pong sinabi yung IATF na hindi na kayo dapat na mag-accommodate ng tao. That is as far as we understand it. So wala naman pong sinabi na buong Pilipinas sumunod doon sa pronouncement ng IATF 104. Wala naman pong ganun. So maaaring pong sa labas itong bubble na to, meron pa rin mga nagsisimbang mga tao kasi hindi naman po sila pinagbawalan.
Okay. Father, may kalinawan naman ngayon doon sa, and as you said, bukas magsasalita si Bishop Pabilio to further clarify and qualify what he said today. Let's get now to yung malinaw na mangyayari and things na ihahain nyo at ihahanda para sa mga Katoliko. What would you say people do during the Holy Week? What can people look forward to? How would you suggest they observe Holy Week?
Well, number one, ibigay natin yung context. Last year kasi, may lockdown, hindi pwedeng lumabas yung mga tao. Pero ngayon, wala namang lockdown. Ang bawal lang ay yung public gatherings nga. So, kung hindi naman kayo makakapasok ng simbahan, pwede naman yung social media gamitin. Ngayon yung social media, sa Facebook usually, lumalabas yung mga misa, makakapili sila doon eh. Lahat ng mga celebrations ando doon po. So lahat ng mga misa, lahat ng mga blessings, pwede nilang ma-access yun, pwede silang makapag-participate through social media. Ngayon po yung pangumpisal, individual naman po yan, hindi pwedeng social media gamitin yan. Hindi rin po pwede through phone. Kinakailangan talaga in person. Yung pong virtual bisita iglesia, in-encourage namin. Hindi na po nila kinakailangan magpalipat-lipat ng simbahan. Meron pong virtual bisita iglesia. Okay? And then of course, meron din po kaming itong Way of the Cross. Pwede din po nilang gawin yan, virtually. At sumabay po sila sa Way of the Cross ng Radio Veritas every Friday po yan. Magagawa po yan. So yung pong mga activities ngayong Holy Week, there is a semblance rather of regularity. Gagawin namin yon in the absence of the public. Magbimisa kami, hindi po naman sinususpend yan kasi it's the high point of our religion, yung ganito pong commemoration. So yun nga lang ang pagkakaiba, yung tao ay wala doon sa loob ng simbahan.
Father, kumusta naman ngayon yung sitwasyon nyo? I understand nakakasampu ng members of the clergy ang have succumbed to COVID, saka medyo marami din kayong infections. Sampung, tama ba yun?
Well, we don't keep track of those who got infected with COVID, but I'm very sure that it's more than 10, yung na-infect niyan. But yung namatay dito sa COVID, halos sa kasunod-sunod po yung pare, na namatay. Dito lang po sa Manila, for example, one was an Agustinian friar, and then another one was a Vincentian priest. Halos magkasunod po sila Sunday and Monday, kumbaga binawiin ng buhay. So kaya po we are very much aware also of the dangers posed by this coronavirus. That's why we are not really going to take the risk. Alam din po namin kung papaano makakatulong po kami para ma-stave off natin itong pagkalat ng coronavirus.
Father, nagmamask din ho ba kayo kahit nasa loob kayo ng seminaryo or sa loob ng building ninyo? Kasi that's what we're being encouraged to do, to keep the masks on even while you're inside the house. I'm just wondering if it's the same way with priests.
Apo. Ang kagandahan po nito sa loob ng kumbento ay meron din kami mga staff. Of course, we encourage na magsuot talaga ng mask. But then, alam niyo ang kumbento kasi hindi naman yung tipong lagi nakikita-kita mga tao. May kanya-kanyang buhay yan eh. Mga pare, may kanya-kanya din ginagawa, kanya-kanyang assignment. And then yung mga staff naman, kung ando doon yung staff, kasi yung iba po ay di na talaga pinapapasok. So kaya makikita natin dito na sa mga masses, kung mapapansin po ninyo, na nagsusuot talaga ng face mask. And then, hindi po pwede na hindi magsuot ng face mask din. Kanina lang po, nung nagmask ako, dahil wala namang tao, wala namang pong face mask kasi wala namang pong risk para sa mga tao. Pero pag Sunday masses noon, we really wear face mask. Kasi kailangan po talaga ito. That's really needed.
Father, syempre, isang malaking konteksto dito is we all just marked the first year of our lockdown. It's been more than a year since COVID. Lahat naman ng sectors affected. Kamustahin na rin po natin ang Catholic, ang simbahan. I'm sure pati po kayo apektado. What has been the effect of COVID and the quarantines on the church, on its coffers? We look at different sectors on the economic impact. This must have had an impact as well on your coffers, on the missions, on the services that Kamusta po ang Catholic Church, ang simbahan sa Pilipinas 1 year into this lockdown?
We start with the coffers. You're talking about the financial stability of the church. I think it's really affected. Hindi naman talaga maiiwasan yun. Dahil nakadepende naman yan sa mga nagsisimba. Kapag wala naman nagsisimba, wala naman din mga donations or love offerings. But the good thing about this, we are thriving in a sense that people also knew the the need of the church. Kaya meron din mga nagdo-donate po sa amin. Meron din po mga nagbibigay. Kaya pagpunta doon sa pastoral works namin, tuloy-tuloy pa rin po. In fact, ang simbahan po ay nakakatulong pa rin sa pamamigay po ng ayuda. Yung pong mga binibigyan po namin, hindi lamang mga Katoliko, kahit na nabibilang po yan sa ibang religion, basta yan po ay mahirap, ay tinutulungan din po namin. So we are thriving in a sense. So what we're doing right now is also to rationalize our operations. So kapag po may mga tao na hindi na naman kinakailangan munang masyado, so binabawasan po namin yung kanyang workload. At yung iba po kasama ng pagbabawas ng workload ay pagbabawas din ng sweldo. But many of the parishes that I knew ay hindi po talaga nagbawas ng sweldo at nagtanggal ng mga tao dahil naaawa din po sila sa mga empleyado po ng simbahan. Ayaw naman nila na yung simbahan ay para maging maging sanhi pa ng mas malalang kahirapan dahil natanggal sila sa trabaho. That's why pinagsusumikapan namin na talaga maibigay din sa tao kung ano yung kakailanganin nila, both sa parishioners at saka dun sa mga empleyado po namin. So we are surviving in that sense.
Think about, when I was listening to Bishop earlier, one of the things that struck me was his statement in regard to, his point that that the faith is as essential as food, as exercise, as jobs, etc., etc. And he said something to the effect na bakit hindi ba essential ang pananampalataya? What are your thoughts on that? And how do you think you're going to address that essential need, at least among the faithful?
Well, for one, we have not stopped. We have not stopped doing our liturgies. We still do the masses. We still give confessions. We still do counseling. If there are house blessings, if there are marriages, baptisms, we continue to do that, to do those things. So meaning to say, on our part, really, that's the need of the people. But those who are deciding on our behalf may have not seen that need. Kaya gano'n na lang ang kanilang naging decision na wala mo ng public, huwag mo na silang papasok. Kaya hindi lang si Bishop Abilio ang nakita natin dito. There was also one bishop na nagsabi na, bakit yung spa, bakit yung gyms ay inaalaw nila. Pero
Bishop
nung narinig ito, parang nag-recanto man yung IATF, di ba? So pinagbawalan na rin nila. So ibig sabihin, sana nga yung sana naging desisyon ng IATF became more rational. In a sense that it should have been well thought of. Hindi yung tipong, ganito na nga yung high point, tapos nangyari na nga yung Pasko, nangyari na yung pagdiriwang ng piyesta ng Quiapo, wala naman napaulat na nag-spike yung coronavirus dahil nagbukas na yung simbahan. Sana na-consider yun, So parang ang nangyari dito, the IATF made a decision based on assumptions. But it's not based on realistic event that transpired. Kasi we can confidently say na wala Nung Pasko, ang dami-daming tao. Nung Quiapo, ang dami-daming tao. Ngayon, nag-rely lang sila sa kanilang assumption na, baka makadagdag pa ito. So kaya isarado na natin payagan.
Father, sa ibang bansa, merong controversy about the moral aspect of using certain types of vaccines. Meron din ba kayong position, CBCP, about it? Any particular vaccine?
Well, una na po dito na nagpahayag na yung vaccine po ay kailangan talaga ng tao. So that was the stand of the conference. Kasi nagkaroon po sila ng pag-meeting, pagpupulong para specifically to discuss the moral implications. And I think they were one in saying that the vaccine is really needed. And then the Vatican has also given its own stand na wala naman na violate on the moral principle. So even the Pope has himself vaccinated already. Not only Pope Francis, but also Pope Benedict. But of course, yung ganitong mga opinion, ina-allow naman natin yan to surface para mapag-usapan. At healthy naman yung mga pag-uusap. So I just hope that makita din ng tao dito, it's also our moral obligation to protect ourselves from this disease and to protect others also. Kasi yung stand ng mga obispo doon, baka naman ayaw mo, hindi ka makakaprotekta ng sarili mo, at yung ibang tao na nakakasalamuha mo, pwede din ma-endanger. So yun po yung ano doon, ang pananaw ng conference.
Okay. Father Jerome Secillano, spokesman for the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Maraming salamat
Thank you,
po.
Father.
Thank you,
Father.
Salamat din po. Thank you.
And that will be all for this special edition of the CHIEFS. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Staff.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Ligao, and we are One News.